Line 33 is the culmination of the introduction to the Aeneid with this exclamatory sentence, and then 34 begins the narration that will take us through really the end of the book and into the epic as a whole. So let's start with 33. We've got of such a great weight or burden or mass it was to found the Roman race, scarcely or barely out of the sight of the land of Sicily into the deep, happy or happily they were giving sails, and they were rushing through the foam of the sea or foam of the salt with their bronze prow. When Juno, guarding or protecting her eternal wound under her chest, said these things to herself or with herself. We've got a number of really great language features and figures of speech here to highlight this kind of climax of the introduction and the beginning of the narration proper. In the first line here that we're considering, line 33, we have the subjective infinitive, to found the Roman race was, and then the genitive phrase with it, of such a great mass. Barely e conspectu seculi telluris in altum. Fairly straightforward, just the noting that altum is used often in poetry and especially by Virgil to mean mare, so into the deep as we use it in English. And then 35, there are a number of figures of speech that work really well together. So they were giving sails is a nice poetic euphemism for they were sailing or they were setting sail. Laeti here, the nominative plural, to agree with it or to modify the subject there. So happy they were giving sails, but as often we can take that adverbially. So they were happily they were giving sails. And then we have the alliteration of the S's to mimic the sort of rushing sound of the sea. And here we have, speaking of rushing, they were rushing through the foam of the salt, and so we have what we can probably call a metonymy here for the sea, and often people translate this as the salty foam, or just the foamy sea. And then we have the synecdoche, that subset of metonymy. This word means bronze, but what we mean there is the bronze prow, that part for the whole, the prow of the ship. And of course, Aeneas has more than one ship, but Virgil here as often plays loose with the singular plural distinction. And then coming down to 36, again, fairly straightforward here, nourishing her eternal wound, and aeternum vulnus bracketing the whole idea here, sub pectore. And then a couple very common language features in poetry, the ellipsis of the speaking verb when it's really clear that coming up next we've got direct speech. And then in Latin, I always find this really neat. When you want to talk to yourself or think to yourself, you actually don't think to yourself, you think cum, you think with yourself. And here, haec, there is that nominative, or excuse me, the accusative neuter plural, these things.